You don't need to believe in the supernatural to find this story terrifying. Because regardless of whether you believe that Anneliese Michel was possessed or simply mentally ill, the torture that she endured is just horrifying, no matter who it came from. But who is the real culprit of her death? The demons that have been said to have possessed her? Her strict religious parents, who did try medical treatment at first, but ultimately reverted to their faith and belief in God for help? Or is it the priests who took one look at Anneliese and knew beyond a doubt that what she had was spiritual and needed to be cast out with exorcism rites? As always, you guys will get all of the facts, and I'll also be playing a piece of the actual voice recordings that were done in these exorcism sessions at the end of the video. Be warned, that recording and the pictures in this video of Anneliese during her time of possession are not for the faint of heart. The story itself is sad and very unnerving, so keep that in mind when deciding if you or anyone else in the room should be listening to it. That being said, are you ready? Then take my hand, hold it tight, and let's walk into the darkness together. Anneliese Elizabeth Michel was born on September 21st, 1952, in Lefelbling, Bavaria, West Germany, to parents Joseph and Anna Michel, who were very strict, very devout Catholics. And as such, they raised Anneliese and her three sisters in a very religious way, making sure that they followed the teachings of Christ and taking them to Mass twice a week, ensuring that they grew up to be devout Catholic young women as well. At the age of 16, Anneliese suffered a seizure during school which caused her to black out. When she came to, it took her a bit to fully recover. Friends and family claimed that Anneliese remained in a trance-like state after convulsing, though Anneliese herself claimed later that she had no memory of what happened to her. A year passed where everything seemed normal, but one night Anneliese suffered a seizure while in her bed, asleep. Convulsions caused her to wet her bed, and according to her parents, she again seemed to be in that same trance-like state. Her parents took her to a neurologist trying to find the cause of the strange behavior, and the neurologist diagnosed her with temporal lobe epilepsy. Some of the symptoms of temporal lobe epilepsy include seizures, loss of memory, and psychosis. The symptoms of psychosis, which she was diagnosed with as well, are audio and visual hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thoughts, disorganized behavior, agitation, and incoherent speech. Now, another symptom of temporal lobe epilepsy is Geschwin syndrome, which is a disorder that causes hyperreligiosity, a condition that causes the person suffering it to have extreme religious beliefs. Now, although Anneliese was never diagnosed with Geschwin syndrome, it is a possibility, so I'm putting it out there. Shortly after being diagnosed with psychosis and temporal lobe epilepsy, Anneliese was also diagnosed with depression. So, Anneliese did have quite a few mental conditions, and because of this, she began a treatment at a psychiatric hospital. In June of 1970, while receiving said treatment, Anneliese suffered a third seizure. They began to prescribe anticonvulsion medications along with others to treat her psychosis, but they weren't really helping. Anneliese had begun to see the face of the devil everywhere she went, and claimed to hear demons speaking to her and whispering in her ear as she prayed, telling her that she was damned and how she would rot in hell. After 5 years of failed treatment, both Anneliese and her family were obviously becoming more and more frustrated with it. Anneliese's depression worsened because of it. A family friend who organized Christian pilgrimages took Anneliese to the church of San Damiano. Once there, Anneliese realized that she was unable to will herself to walk in front of a crucifix, and then she blatantly refused to drink water that came from a holy spring. The family friend then told Anneliese and her family that she suspected due to these things that Anneliese was possessed. The family processed this and couldn't help but notice that, yes, a lot of what Anneliese was experiencing did coincide with symptoms of possession. Anneliese also began to worsen at the time. She refused to come in contact with any religious items. She became suicidal and was convinced now that she was possessed, so she began to rip all of her clothes off daily and do 400 squats. I'm not sure what the thought process was behind that, but yes. Now, the family, also convinced now, sought out the help of the church, asking them to perform an exorcism on Anneliese and free her from the demon that had taken refuge inside of her. The church replied, denying her exorcism, and they encouraged her parents to seek out medical treatment for Anneliese. They also told them that a bishop had to approve the exorcism before they could proceed. That did not deter the family, however. They continued to seek help from the church and found a priest named Ernst Alt, who was willing to help them. Father Alt felt that Anneliese didn't look like someone who had epilepsy. And of course, by this time, Anneliese had gotten way worse. She now believed that she could speak to the Virgin Mary. She had begun to growl, eat spiders and coal. She began to throw things and see demons everywhere. She had also become very aggressive and was injuring herself. She would also pee on the floor, and then she would drop to her knees and begin to drink her own urine. She had bitten the head off of a dead bird's body, and at one point she even began to bark like a dog. She spent 2 whole days crawling under the table, just barking. Anna, her mother, also claims that she had seen her daughter suffering from stigmata. Now, most of us horror fans know what that is, but for anyone who doesn't, stigmata is a condition where a person begins to bleed for no apparent reason through parts of their body where Christ bled when he was crucified. It's primarily through the palms from what I've seen, but there have been cases of people bleeding through their feet or even through their foreheads where Christ would have carried the crown of thorns, as well as other places. But you get the gist of it. Now, considering that Anneliese had been hurting herself, I'm not exactly sure how much validity to place on this claim, so I'll leave it up to you guys to decide if you want to take it into account or not. But even without it, seeing all the other things going on with Anneliese must have been a big shock to Father Alt. There is actually a quote from the priest that explains part of what Anneliese had personally confided to him. From what it sounds like, it seems to be about her reaction to entering a church. He says, Anneliese told me, and Frau Hein confirmed this, that she was unable to enter the shrine. She approached it with the greatest hesitation, then said that the soil burned like fire, and that she simply could not stand it. She then walked around the shrine in a wide arc and tried to approach it from the back. She looked at the people who were kneeling in the area surrounding the little garden, and it seemed to her that while praying they were gnashing their teeth. She got as far as the edge of the little garden, then she had to turn back. Coming from the front again, she had to avert her glance from the picture of Christ in the chapel of the house. She made it several times to the garden, but could not get past it. She also noted that she could no longer look at medals or pictures of saints. They sparkled so immensely that she could not stand it. Father Alt consulted a doctor who agreed that what was wrong with Anneliese was not medical, and so he went to a bishop by the name of Joseph Stangl and explained the case to him. The bishop agreed to allow the exorcism as long as it was done secretly. He then granted Father Arnold Renz the permission needed to have him perform the exorcism rite. This was the beginning of Anneliese's end. During the span of 10 months, Father Renz, assisted by Father Alt, performed 67 exorcisms, starting on September 24th, 1975, each lasting from 1 to 4 hours. During that time span, Anneliese's parents discontinued her treatment of the psychiatric hospital, per her own request, but continued to give Anneliese an antipsychotic drug that she had been prescribed. She took this drug almost until the day of her death. During these exorcisms, Anneliese wrote a few letters to Father Alt in which she said things like, "I am nothing. Everything about me is vanity. What should I do? I have to improve. You pray for me." She also wrote once, "I want to suffer for other people, but this is so cruel." Clearly, possessed or not, her thought process was definitely disturbed by her mental health conditions. And as the exorcisms continued to go on, she began to speak more and more about herself, dying to atone for the wayward youth of the day and the apostate priests of the modern church. Towards the end, Anneliese began to deny food and water, but she had already been eating and drinking very little due to the exorcisms. She had also been kneeling continuously on knees that were completely destroyed. Her tendons had been torn and bones had been broken due to how many times she had been forced to kneel for said exorcisms. And I'm sure the 400 squats a day didn't really help much either. She was also no longer able to move on her own and without assistance. On July 1st, 1976, Anneliese's suffering ended and she passed away in her home. The official cause of death was stated as malnutrition and dehydration from almost a year of being near starving state. Anneliese weighed 66 pounds at the time of her death. The autopsy also showed that Anneliese had been suffering from pneumonia at the time of her death. On March 30th, 1978, Joseph Michel, Anna Michel, Father Ernst Alt, and Father Arnold Renz were all put on trial for Anneliese's death and charged with negligent homicide. Of course, the Vatican provided the priests with lawyers on their side, and the Michels were defended by a famous defense attorney named Erich Schmidt-Lichner. The prosecution maintained their stance, stating that Anneliese's death could have been prevented up to 1 week before she died. They brought in doctors who testified and said that Anneliese was not possessed but suffered psychosis, and that the manifestations that were being claimed as demonic possession were simply the symptoms of her condition and a psychological effect of her very strict, very religious upbringing. The defense argued that Anneliese was indeed possessed. In fact, she had 6 demons inside of her, named Judas Iscariot, Nero, Cain, Hitler, Fleischmann, who was a disgraced priest before he died, and the 6th and final demon was none other than Lucifer himself. They submitted the tapes of the exorcisms as proof, claiming that these demons would argue with each other and fight for control over Anneliese's body. For example, Hitler would state that people are pigs, they think it's all over after death. It goes on. And then Judas would call Hitler a big mouth and tell him that he had no real say in hell. Stuff like that. The defense also claimed that the exorcism was legal because the German constitution allows and protects all citizens in the unrestricted exercise of their religious beliefs. Allegedly, Dr. Richard Roth, the doctor that Father Alt had consulted, also made an appearance in one of the tapes, as he told Anneliese that there is no injection against the devil, Anneliese. They also claim that just before her death, Anneliese had been freed of her demonic possession with the last exorcism session they had performed on her. Bishop Stengel, the one who had okayed the exorcism, claimed that he was not aware of Anneliese's alarming mental health when he approved it. The court decided that he didn't have to testify in court, so he never appeared. Now, the state recommended that none of them be jailed for the crime, but instead have the priest pay a fine. The prosecution claimed that the parents had suffered enough and should be exempt from jail because of it, something that seems to be a thing possible in German law. In April of 1978, the Michels and both priests were found guilty of negligent homicide. They were sentenced to 6 months in jail, which then was reduced to 3 years probation, and the priests were ordered to pay a fine. Years later, the church did retract the claim that Anneliese had been possessed. So after the trial, Anneliese's parents requested and were granted the permission to exhume her body because she had been buried in a hurry and in a cheaply made casket. February 25th, 1978, almost 2 whole years after her death, Anneliese's remains were moved to a new oak coffin. There is a rumor, though, that a nun had told the parents of Anneliese that she had had a vision with their daughter and that her body was still intact, and that would be proof that Anneliese had been possessed. Now, the official report claims that the body showed signs of deterioration that were consistent with the 2 years that Anneliese's body had been buried, so if the rumor about the nun is true, she was way off. Nonetheless, Anneliese's tomb has become a sort of shrine for small groups of Catholics who believe in her story and that she did sacrifice herself to atone for the wayward youth and apostate priests. In a 2016 interview done by her mother, Anna states that she has no regrets whatsoever and says, "I know I did the right thing because I saw the signs of Christ in her hands," referring to the stigmata that I mentioned before. Now, Anneliese's case, of course, was the inspiration for 2 pretty popular movies, one named Requiem and the other named The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which I haven't seen in a long time and now I feel the need to check out again. So about the tapes now, I listened to a lot of it and I'm only going to post about 3 minutes here because there really isn't a point for more unless you translate them. I was able to find a translated one, but due to copyrights and whatnot, I cannot post it in this video. You can, of course, Google it and the full tapes if you like. Still, these 3 minutes are extremely unsettling and it gives you a really good idea of what Anneliese had been going through. Possessed or not, they're really not easy to listen to. So, like I said, please be aware, and there is no shame if you want to click off now and maybe check out some of my other material. I won't get upset. But from the parts that I heard of the tapes with translation, I can tell you that the demons speak of the rosary as a powerful weapon against them and the devil. But they say that luckily it's been marketed more towards women, so not many use it. They also talk about where embryos go, which they claim is heaven. The demons also fight with each other. The priest will ask it a question, and as the demon begins to reply, another will stop it and yell at it to shut up. They also talk about how the priest should dress and behave as such, or should be removed, and how the world needs to know that the devil exists. In my personal opinion, I'm not really convinced that these are things that demons would say, but I also noticed that these priests are treating her exorcism as more of an interview, asking the so-called demons questions and having them answer rather than trying to remove them. If Anneliese was possessed, I truly doubt that they would have ever had a successful removal of any of these demons, because they were too busy playing 21 questions with them. I'm going to sign off now, and I'll leave you with the audio. I'll see you next time.
Die Pforten der Hölle werden...
Ja, ja! Die katholische Lehre muss unverfälscht.
Die ganze Wahrheit zu sagen, im Namen des Vaters und des Sohnes und des Heiligen Geistes. Amen.
Ja, die muss unverfälscht verkündet werden.
Welche vor allem? Die Lehre über die Eucharistie.
Jawohl, die Drecksausie.
Die Lehre über die Eucharistie.
Ja!
Die Lehre über die Engel. Unreiner Geist, ich befehle dir alles zu sagen. Im Namen des Vaters und des Sohnes und des Heiligen Geistes. Amen. Was müssen die Priesterkandidaten tun? Ich befehle dir es zu sagen, im Namen Jesu und im Namen Mariens.
Beten.
Die müssen noch was anderes tun. Lebensführung, wie soll die sein? Im Namen Jesu und im Namen Maria befehle ich dir, alles zu sagen. Im Namen des Vaters und des Sohnes und des Heiligen Geistes. Amen.
Die müssen in eigenen Seminaren ausgebildet werden, die dürfen nicht auf die anderen Universitäten. Oh. Kapiert?
Ja. Ist da sonst noch etwas zu sagen?
Umgedreht, Alter.
Vater der Lüge, sage die volle Wahrheit.
Das ist von den anderen Partei.
Und des Sohnes und des Heiligen Geistes. Amen.
Das ist mit der Hand gerät, Alter. Das ist mit der Hand gerät, Alter.
Ja, der ist von den anderen Katholiken so blöd, wie sie sind von denen abgeguckt. Oh, dabei haben sie selber die wahre Lehre. Oh, die sind ja so. Oh.
Meinst du die Protestanten?
Ja, ja.
Sage die volle Wahrheit.
Da haben sie die wahre Lehre und glaubt an ihn noch.
Und des Sohnes
Wie eine Hure. So, im Auftrag von der. Oh, hoffentlich schmeckt das euch. Nein!
dass die katholische Lehre unverfälscht wiedergegeben werden muss. Und dass man nichts übernehmen soll, was der
Ja.
katholischen Lehre
Ja,
schadet.
ja, und dass sich die Katholiken und vor allem die Oben wie eine Hure benehmen. Sie laufen den anderen nach, die überhaupt nicht schlecht sind. Ja, und den anderen, das hier noch mehr da.
Welche besonders?
Welche anderen? Welche anderen? Anglikaner?